Welcome to Curiosities of Teaching and Learning, a podcast hosted and produced by the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning, a changemaker in education since 1994.
We are reaching out to excellent teachers from across the country to hear how they and their students and their colleagues are navigating teaching and learning during this really unprecedented time. With this series, it is our hope to elevate the voice of teachers in this massive effort and to recognize teachers as the leaders and pioneers that we really know them to be. I am Emily Wilson, and I will be facilitating our conversation today. I am joined by our CEO, Dr. Roland O'Daniel. Good morning, Roland.
Good morning.
And together we want to welcome our guest of honor, joining us from Chicago, a 7th and 8th grade language and literacy teacher, Mr. Aaron Fisher. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Oh, great. We're happy to have you. As a former Chicagoan, it is April. I feel my obligation in terms of a first question is it snowing today?
It is beautifully sunny today.
Oh,
it snowed yesterday, on and off all day. So yes, it is snowing.
Oh my gosh. Well, at least Chicago's consistent in that way.
Consistent in its inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Weather.
Well, hello from the sunny south. I can say that. It's been great weather here the last couple of days. Not to rub it in or anything.
No, not at all. We had a 65 degree day a few days ago. So this is the way spring works in Chicago. We get teased and then we get put back in our place.
You put away your parka and then get it out 2 days later. Put it away, get it out. But in all sincerity, thank you for joining Roland and I. I'm excited for folks to get to know you and to hear your approach to this distance learning situation that we all find ourselves in. But to kick us off, if you could just share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, your role, and your school, I think that'd be a great way to begin.
Yeah. I am in my 12th year of teaching. I'm at the Academy for Global Citizenship. It is a small charter school on the southwest side over by Midway Airport. We have actually 2 buildings, but we are one school. Our one building is kindergarten through 2nd grade, and our other building is 3rd through 8th. We rent both buildings, one from a private company and the other from Chicago Public Schools. It's the annex building from Hearst Elementary, which is our neighbor building. But we will be breaking ground hopefully next year on a brand new building that we have been planning for about 10 years since the inception of our network. Well, I guess not network, but school. And that school will be 100% net positive energy. We will be having solar, geothermal, wind power. And then we will also be having a farm and trying to make it so that we actually eat off of the farm that we'll be going to school right next to. So very excited about that. We just received a $31 million grant from the state of Illinois to facilitate that building. So we look forward to being kind of an incubator of innovation when it comes to sustainable practices in education.
Oh my goodness. Well, you'll definitely have lots of wind power in the Windy City. No problem there. That's so exciting. And how exciting for you to get to be involved in, in such an endeavor. What about your role? Tell us a little bit about what your role is specifically in this school.
So I've been there 4 years and I've definitely been able to develop my role in the school in general. It began as me being hired as a 7th and 8th grade language and literacy teacher. We are an IB school, and so one of my first roles was to get to know IB, International Baccalaureate Framework. So I attended quite a few trainings and have really come to love the IB way. It allows me to kind of blend my interest and autonomy with my need for some structure and rigidity. So it's a really great framework that has really kind of saved my soul in teaching, actually, coming from 2 pretty big charter school networks that were more so all rigidity, all framework, all of that kind of almost confining systems. So it's been really great. My role at this school also has developed into the 8th grade trip coordinator. I've taken on the role of coordinating our 8th grade service learning trip every year. So being the Academy for Global Citizenship, we want to give our students a experience with being global citizens. So we have a international trip to Guatemala, and we have a domestic trip to Puerto Rico where we go and do service. In Guatemala, we do service with fair trade coffee farmers, and in Puerto Rico, we do service with mangrove tree restoration, coastal tree restoration, and invasive species removal. So that has become a huge role of mine as well as the coordinator for that trip. It is a all year responsibility with fundraising, coordination with parents, and then coordination with the companies and the organizations we work with.
Sure. And the students that you service are these students who typically get to do a lot of international travel?
No, they're not. Many of the students, it is their first time on an airplane. It is the first time away from their families. My student population is 75% Hispanic, about 15% Polish and white, and 10% Black. So we also are about 90% free or reduced lunch. So we have an incredibly interesting and powerful community that it has actually come to our school because of our mission. They are seeking bigger opportunities for their families and for their children.
Yeah.
And we are proud to offer that, whether it be with our inquiry-based learning or our international trip options or our organic meals that we prepare every day fresh for them. We have vegan, vegetarian options, and overall, we're really working to serve the whole child.
Yeah, it sounds like create an opportunity that, typically wouldn't be there for them.
On all fronts, yeah.
Yeah. So let's kind of spend a little time talking about, thank you for that, sort of painting a picture of your role in the school and the school in general. I know that the COVID crisis, we saw it coming, but it arrived in what felt like an abrupt way. Mm-hmm. So maybe if you could just paint a picture for us of what the distance learning environment has looked like so far for your kiddos. I know in some districts we are not grading anything, we're not covering any new content, we're only doing review. In other districts, we're only accessing kiddos through printed packets. And just help us understand kind of the scenario that you find yourself in now.
Yeah, sure. Last year I was a representative on the leadership team for middle school, and something that kept coming up over and over again was that we didn't have the technology to meet our students' needs. So we advocated last year for one-to-one technology for our middle school and got it. And so this year we rolled out iPads for every middle school student with a keyboard. We rolled out Google Classroom. We've used other modes of technology such as GoodNotes. Our math went 100% digital with GoodNotes using styluses. And it's really transformed the way that we deliver instruction in school. But it has made this extremely difficult transition a little bit easier, knowing that all of our students and all of our families were already dialed in. With our families, we have a good electronic communication system in place. We use ManageBack for everything basically, but that's for family communication. So they're familiar with that, and our students have been familiar with the technology use. So that has helped a lot.
So you've continued kids have taken their devices home and you're continuing to interact with them through their device, through Google Classroom and maybe some other platforms?
Yes, and I see this as an evolution. So we're on spring break now, but for the first 2.5 weeks that we went digital, us teachers kind of went at it however we felt would be best for our subject matter and our students. So I assigned a chapter book where it was available electronically. There was an audiobook link, and then I gave them a study guide where there was a calendar on top, and they were able to kind of self-guide for the 3 weeks that we were working. And I would do check-ins, check in with them on Google Meet and through email. And I see it as an evolution, because here after spring break, I don't want to just deliver another packet. I want to build on their experience. That's something I really try to do in the school year, in the classroom anyway, is have one experience build to the next and have that continuity. So with the historical fiction chapter book that they worked with, they will be doing an assessment that I will be grading. Another kind of good thing about the timing is that I have taught a lot of foundational skills. I have hit a lot of those Common Core state standards, not only once, but multiple times, that my students do know how to use evidence from the text to support their ideas and things like that. So I still plan on assessing them, skills that I've taught, but different contexts.
Okay.
And then building onto their experiences. We're about to get into a research portion that should last about 3 weeks, building onto the historical context of the chapter book.
Sure. If it's not apparent, we used to teach together. And I think one thing that I've always appreciated about you is your passion to iterate and to build upon, what you've tried. I just feel like it's a hallmark when I think of you and your teaching. But there's so much that you just said in there that I'd like you to unpack for us a little bit. And one thing I would like you to share with folks is the text that you selected and why you felt like it was appropriate. Kind of, you expressed to me the other day, it was appropriate to send kids off with.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Pardon me. So I chose Esperanza Rising, which I would not have chose if it was in my classroom. Esperanza Rising being a level V is more appropriate for middle of 6th grade, and I'm teaching 7th grade with this text.
Okay.
But I chose it because although it is a level V with its Fontes and Pinnell, it has really deep exploration of life and struggle and identity, which allows for my higher achievers to elaborate on their thinking and their interpretations and their analysis of the text, whereas it allows my students who need more support access. It also had the audiobook, so that helped a lot. And it also connects to many of my students' Latinx roots and their families. And then being a historical fiction novel where it takes place in the Great Depression, it is a good touch point to send my students into research on that very complex topic of the Great Depression, where they're going to be able to be more inquiry-based coming up, so that I can say, okay, Esperanza went through this and her family went through this. What did other families go through? What happened in the Great Depression in Illinois or in New York? So it's a book that provides a foundation to further exploration. And it's also a book that works for all my learners.
Yeah. I think your thoughtfulness around that is really complex and layered, all the way from like text complexity, text level, to themes and accessibility. There's so much there. We talk so frequently about the importance of text selection in the classroom, but I think what you're recognizing here is that you're not side by side with them to help them navigate the text the way that you would be in the classroom. And that has impacted the text that you have selected. You need kids to be able to engage with it without you there to catch them in the same way that you could in the classroom. And go ahead.
It also allowed me the opportunity to get the students used to facilitating their own work, because I made a calendar, made it into a 3-week experience. I feel like it also helps settle them into e-learning and having that self-determination to keep working through. As well as, I had another point, but I forgot. It'll come back to me.
Welcome to my whole life. Could you also share with us, you have a great population of kiddos who are managing two languages or learning English at school. I imagine in middle school, you may have some kiddos who've officially sort of tested out of English learner status, but I know that we all know you're an English learner for life.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about this online resource that you're leveraging that is specifically helpful for English learners?
Yes, and that actually reminds me of what I was going to mention. So you were segueing anyway. It allowed for differentiation. I rolled out the guide to all students a certain way, and then I went in and I kind of pruned for different students or added for different students depending on their needs. So one thing that was great is I found a resource for English language learners that this audiobook is connected to. And the audiobook actually has a speed choice option right at the top. So it can be slowed down or sped up depending on the student's need. And then I also, in the guide, I had pretty complex vocabulary work, pretty complex literary device and literary element work, and then comprehension questions and analysis questions. So a lot of different levels of questioning, as well as vocabulary and literary element interactions. That is where I was able to go and kind of prune out or highlight and give students, I would use Google documents to comment. You can find this evidence here. I was able to go into their text that was electronic, and me and the diverse learners teacher worked together to highlight different parts of that text and help guide them to which questions were connected to which parts of the text. So it's really been more dynamic than I expected. When you think study guide, you think, oh, you're just giving the kid a packet, which yes, it is a packet, but it is a packet that can be modified for the needs of our learners. I added science connections. I added social studies connections where they would, the learners that were capable and able to and had that bandwidth, I had them go and do research on different aspects of the book already to connect to other subjects. So it's been more dynamic than I even expected when I first assigned it.
Yeah, it sounds like, we had to speed up to get everything ready. But in some ways, in terms of instructional design, it sounds like you've been able to slow down in ways that we maybe typically don't get to when we are also designing and implementing for 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Roland, did you have any questions about what you've heard from Aaron so far?
I'm got millions of questions, but I'm listening, so I appreciate you sharing all of this. I ultimately would want to go back and talk about some of the different ways you differentiated that. I know you talked about different kinds of questions, but how you kind of made some of those decisions. But I think you'll probably get to some of that. I'm just enjoying. I'm taking notes. I'm an avid note taker. So on a separate call later on, and we can edit this part out if we want to. I want to talk about your math teachers going one-to-one with the iPads and the styluses.
Yes.
Different conversation.
And I'm sure that teacher would love to have that conversation with you. She's incredible. She is our screen grab guru. So whenever there's something that she finds out how to do or realizes, she creates a screen grab of it and narrates it and sends it to the staff. So she would, I'm sure, be happy to speak to you about that, because I can only elaborate on a tiny amount when I pop in and see what they're doing or hear about it during meetings. But yeah.
So a lot of the work that we do with teachers is centered around this idea, this fact, not idea, this fact that literacy is the way that we learn in any content area, in any discipline. Even in math, you need to be reading about your math, writing about it, speaking and listening with your peers about what you're doing and why, engaging with the vocab. And I know that we bring in routines into our traditional classroom that give kids opportunities to write regularly about what they're learning or speak to one another regularly about what they're learning. I'm wondering if you have either created fresh for this new scenario, that you have any sort of routines that you're engaging in regularly with your kids that allow them to be reading about your content, writing, speaking, listening, etc. Or if you have a routine that you've established in the classroom that you're really leaning on right now and bringing it to your digital space.
Yeah. So a routine that I'm leaning on is we have an advisory group. It's our homeroom. It's our small group. It's our family group that we see every day at the beginning and end of the day. And they're specifically, I am their point of contact. I am their parents' point of contact. So that has been a structure that I've really kept in place. We have almost daily meetings on Google Meet. But that is only 7 kids. So I do get to touch base with them, interact with them, and that routine is very important to them as well, I think. A routine that I plan on really making an effort to solidify coming up after spring break here is direct instruction. Although IB is inquiry-based learning, it is not just do what you want and see what happens. There is an important aspect of direct instruction that I am missing, my students are missing, and I think is an extremely important structure to put them on a consistent path to new learning. I think it's something that's possible to do, and I think it's something they're craving, is give me something new. Give me something that you are modeling that I am trying out with support. And I think it's possible. Although literacy is, I agree with you 100%, the path to learning, I don't think that it can be done implicitly all the time. I think that explicit teaching is absolutely necessary. So moving forward, as I said, I want this process to evolve. And that's why I'm excited to do a research-based 3-week chunk of time coming up, because I can create direct instruction videos. That's something that I actually plan to fill this weekend with, is like a lesson plan, like a unit plan. I'm going to be creating probably 1 video per week, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, that has direct instruction, that has modeling. And I would love to do an I do, we do, you do kind of scenario, going all the way back to my roots, because I think that it works, and that it's really important for the students to see me do it and then work together. So I'm thinking of a group element of this research project where students aren't necessarily doing a group project, but they do have a group that they touch base with and that they share work with and share ideas with. So that I can try to settle them into that routine. Now it's going to be very challenging because I also need to collaborate with my other team members and make sure that we're not overwhelming the students, that I would like to be doing as much cross-curricular learning as possible, where I'm going to be reaching out to the social studies teacher, actually right now after this call, to talk to her about how we can collaborate so that our students have an authentic experience that is not overwhelming and not disjointed, and doesn't feel like busy work. I'm hearing students say, we are just getting busy work. And I'm like, oh boy, we can't lose these students because we're just giving them busy work. We can do this. We're a strong team. And they see it in real life, that we're a strong team and that when we collaborate, and they say, hey, Miss Salazar was talking about this too. Is that on purpose? And we say, yes, it is on purpose. And we can do that virtually as well. I know it.
Yeah. You just said so much in the last couple of minutes. that I think is worth highlighting or circling back to. But I also just want to say, like, how can people think teaching is a simple thing to do? Holy smokes. The first thing that I think really called out to me is how you started talking about a learning cycle or a learning framework. You were articulating direct instruction, went back to your roots with the I do, we do, you do. I do believe that a lot of us were thrust into this situation and had to get things together and get it to the kids as soon as possible. But what I hear you articulating is that there is a cycle to learning. There are certain processes that need to happen, and that's no different whether they're in the classroom or at home. So I'll be very excited to hear from you sort of how you structure your I do, we do, you do. Because I tend to agree with you. Your kids are going to need those experiences. Just because they're not sitting in their classroom doesn't mean they don't need an opportunity to process with a peer or to see a model from their teacher. Mm-hmm. And then I also am so appreciative of hearing you talk about overwhelming kids and trying to work with your colleagues to ensure that there's cohesiveness. Your pacing to me sounds, like one video a week, 10 minutes, or a couple of videos a week, 10 minutes. That's probably pretty palatable or manageable for kiddos. I feel like your approach is just so smart and so thoughtful. And so I appreciate you sharing that aloud with others, because I think these are the questions we need to be asking ourselves. How much and how do they engage? What experiences do they need? Roland, did you have anything you wanted to add or interject there?
So one of the questions I have is you mentioned you all are an IB school, and I know that with the IB comes some out of control, not necessarily out of control, but some expectations for assessments and some specific expectations that are IB expectations, not just an IB International Baccalaureate is an international organization. Have they adjusted those expectations? And I know this is kind of a little bit off topic, but as you're thinking about your research, I know it's got to tie in looking for inquiry based. And I know a lot of IB is very intentionally integrated between different content areas. So I know that's probably something you all already talk about. So that's one of the things that was running through my head.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say to that piece. We have, so I'll say a few things. I think IB has been responding to this just like we have, and they're probably getting their ducks in a row because they are very intentional, before they really roll out any changes or differences in expectations. But I think that IB's expectation is that we do what we do and with IB virtually. And that's where my thought process is, IB has the approaches to learning, and they go kindergarten to 12th grade, and they don't become more complex as the grades go along. They stay the same. Students are expected to perform these skills that are mostly around executive functioning. They're expected to develop the skill complexity through the content and through the experiences. And I think as IB teachers, we need to just be continuing to teach our students the skills that they need through the virtual learning experience. Now, yes, it is more difficult, but I've also I see the students exhibiting IB traits and the attitudes that we teach them in school. I see them exhibiting them outside of school in this virtual environment. I see them exhibiting the resilience. So we're also a part of the authorization process right now. So our middle years program is this year in our authorization process. We are a primary years program authorized. And now that our middle school is fully populated and settled in, we are now in the authorization process. And IB has given a choice. Would you rather us hold your authorization until we're back to our traditional school system, or would you like us to perform your authorization virtually? And we had quite a long conversation with our team and have come to the conclusion that we would prefer to have it in school. And so IB has given us that option to wait and put it off. Quite a few people were interested in doing it virtually, but more, and we go democratic process at our school, more were interested in waiting because of the things that are happening in the classroom and how incredible they are, and us wanting to exhibit them. So I think, as always, IB has high expectations, but also they are being very flexible with those expectations.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
You had the opportunity a little bit earlier to kind of mention how you're continuing to be in community with your kiddos, particularly around your advisory. But I just want to give you the opportunity to share with others anything you might be doing to continue to build that safe learning environment, stay connected to your kiddos. And as a former Chicago teacher, my head is particularly with 7th grade students who grades this year and testing this year will have major impact on where they can go to high school and where they can apply, which, if you're not familiar with Chicago's system, as a teacher, felt 1,000 times more intense than my personal college application process is the high school application process. So anything in either of those two buckets, how you're staying connected with kids, and then in particular, what this time is meaning for 7th graders.
Yeah, that is one of the things that weighs most heavily on my mind, actually, because I have not received any information about how Chicago Public Schools is going to navigate that. We did take that standardized test you mentioned in the winter, but winter scores are not indicative of a full year of learning or students being in the mental state of taking that test as seriously and as most prepared as they should be able to. So those scores are, in my opinion, not valid to use. That goes same with their grades, especially with IB. Again, we work on a grading philosophy that is, if you exhibit skills in the 3rd trimester, we go by trimesters, that you did not exhibit in the 2nd, but you exhibit them in the 3rd, you get credit for that exhibition. And your 2nd trimester results, although still considered, are not weighed as heavily. So I have students that'll exhibit skills in their analysis abilities in the 3rd trimester because I've taught them and we've developed those abilities throughout the year, that they end up, exhibiting A criteria, getting an A on an assignment. And I say, okay, well, that brings their C's up to B's, or they're all those B's I see now that they have an A. So that is a big concern. And we're really just waiting for Chicago Public Schools to tell us what they're going to do about it. I'll bet they're freaking out too. I mean, what are they going to do? The selective enrollment, the international baccalaureate schools, they're all point-based, and they're all dependent on both grades and the standardized test scores.
And attendance. Attendance weighs really heavily in the algorithm, and how are we handling that? So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing for advisory and how you're staying connected with your kiddos. You mentioned some things the other day that I thought were really thoughtful.
So I put out a meeting every day at 3 for students to join if they want. I usually get about 5 to 6 of them. Most of the time it's the same students that join, the ones that just really enjoy interacting with each other, really enjoy just chatting and checking in and seeing how things are going. So I just kind of put that out there every day. And then oftentimes they'll request a Kahoot. So I will ask them to join the Kahoot, and they can do their little fun quizzes, or sometimes I make them academic based, and they really enjoy those, to just connect with something other than how are you doing and what are you doing. Just having a shared experience has been good with that. And then I do have once a week where I get the whole advisory together, and that usually requires me to reach out to parents, which is fine. Text the parent, hey, ask your kid to get into the meeting today. And then we do more of a formal, I give them updates on what teachers have been talking about, and do more of a formal check-in of each kid goes, how are you doing? I'll do one question that each kid can answer, such as, other than your phone, what has been bringing you peace and joy, things like that. So that's been nice to keep community connection.
I think the way that your school, so this is one thing that I hear you, an existing structure that you all are leaning on, in that advisory has been divvied up again amongst all staff, so that your staff really runs point with about 11 kiddos in this homeroom or advisory, whereas I think in many settings, homeroom is an entire class, 30, 35 kids, but we're leveraging all available staff. And I have to imagine that that is really, like, that effort is really bearing fruit right now. Because in my conversation with other schools, this is something they're thinking about trying to set up right now, which is just another new thing to introduce. So I appreciate that.
It's helped a ton with parent communication too, because I mean, the advisors do the conferences. We're that point of contact for the parents. And so they have the relationship with us. They feel comfortable. I can shoot any of the parents a text and it's well received. And we also acknowledge each other's struggles, that, like, you know, it must be very challenging for parents right now. And we have to be empathetic and sympathetic to what's going on with them. I mean, I recently spoke to one of my advisory parents, and like, hey, how's it going? She's like, well, one of my friends had an emergency and I have her newborn now. And I'm like, what? Like, you have your friend's newborn now? And she has a 3rd grader, a 5th grader, a 7th grader. And a preschooler. She has 5 kids in the house. And sometimes you got to shoot them that meme that says parents must be freaking out right now, and give them that grace. And so it's been really helpful to have that parent contact point really settled as well.
Well, I think the structure that you all have established has probably made that a lot more manageable for teachers too, as opposed to trying to reach out to, 30, 50 parents, really having sort of a smaller set that you're dealing with. Talk to us a little bit about, you've mentioned throughout, communication with colleagues and different conversations you all have had to have about IB, et cetera, et cetera. How are you staying connected with colleagues? What sort of structures are you all leveraging?
Yeah, so we have a social coordinator, and she does once a week happy hour, and she's been doing theme-based happy hours. So last one was luau, and I got to wear my really fun Hawaiian shirt. So that's been a fun way to keep contact. Our principals, we have 2 buildings, so we have 2 principals right now. They put out a call for teachers to film themselves doing exercise and mindfulness practices and wellness practices at home. And they're compiling a video of all the teachers doing these different exercises and things. And they're going to be sending out that video to parents and students. And then we have our weekly meeting with the team that our middle school team gets together. Our principal has our regular agenda every week at school. We have a regular agenda in Google Sheets. They've kept that structure. And we meet, we do check-ins, we do updates, we have a voting system of fist to 5, fist being 0, I don't want it, 5 being I'm all in. So we've kept the democratic process, we've kept the collaboration with the meeting. That's been really helpful. And also just the teachers, we have really good relationships. I was saying last time we spoke, we're kind of like a family where we love each other so much that we hate each other, but not really, like we know each other so well. We work so closely together that we I communicate through FaceTime one-on-one with teachers, text, phone call, very collaborative on individual students, especially ones that we know have those high needs, whether it be academic or social emotional. So our team has been, really, really responsive and collaborative. I think I'm really proud of it.
Roland, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Just that I appreciate the fact that the adults are trying to keep those same routines and structures to support themselves, and that they're translating that into the students. I mean, it's obvious that you all are very thoughtful in both directions to make sure that there's support for everybody. And you're right, this is uncharted territory, and what it's going to look like, I think, is interesting long term.
Yeah, to add on one more structure, we have our tech coordinator created a spreadsheet, and so there's a new tab for each week, and teachers check in with their student work every other day, and put into that spreadsheet we have a code of how much the student has produced. And so that's been a great way for advisors to see a snapshot of their students across the board. So I can contact a parent and say, hey, your kid's doing all their language and lit work, all their science work, but they haven't touched their Spanish work. Or I've shared the screen with students on an individual basis and say, look, we're keeping track here. This isn't a vacation. So that spreadsheet's been super helpful, that we can say, we don't have to contact a teacher and say, hey, is their math work done? We can just go in and see that.
Yeah, I think the thing that resonates most with me, or like the theme or thread throughout everything I hear you saying, is that it seems as though your school has some pretty tight protocols around collaboration and communication, both with children, parents, and peers. And so it has been, I won't say easy, but it has been an easier process to translate them to distance, because those are protocols that you practiced already in the school building. Regular meetings with a regular agenda and a democratic process has translated this advisory setting. And so for me, that just really hits home that as a school leader, how can we leverage what we already have in place, protocols for collaboration and communication, and use them here as opposed to thrusting even more new upon our kiddos and our teachers? My last question really for you is, if you could just think back and reflect. I know your answer to this question would change in a month and in 2 months, most probably. But thus far, what is something that you have learned either about yourself as a teacher or about your students in this unique process that we're going through?
Yeah. Something that we know in teaching in general is that in order for a student to show mastery, they have to do it independently. And oftentimes, even when we think they're doing it independently, they're not, because we're right there. And they see us and they feel our presence, and they know that we will come to assist them or clarify when they put their hand in the air or when they call out our name. But they can't do that. And what I've learned so impressively about my students is that they're exhibiting skills and strategies that they've been taught in such an authentic way right now. As I mentioned, whether it be the resilience or the academic skills or the social emotional skills. So what I've learned is that they've learned.
Yeah.
And so much of what they're doing right now is real world problems, and it's real world problem solving that is required of them and required of us. And I've learned that we can solve these problems as long as we work together, as long as, the 3 pieces of the triangle, the 3 points, parents, teachers, and students, can be aligned. It's possible. This is possible. And it's not easy, and it's not ideal, and it's, I miss my classroom. I miss my students. I miss the whole vibe of the school. But for now, we're doing it, and it's possible. But we all have to be continuing the investment. And so I'm learning to continue to learn how to teach.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us are seeing things in our students that we maybe knew were there, but didn't see on a daily basis, or are being pleasantly surprised by. It's my hope that when we do get our kiddos back, maybe we don't come over when they raise their hand as much. Because I think, kind of to your point, we know they've learned it when they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Before we sign off, I just want to thank you again for being here with us, for sharing what you're doing as you scale this mountain that is in front of you. And teaching can be an isolating experience. So much of that depends on your school, but most of us are in a room. We're the only adult in that room all day long. And I think teaching from home could really amplify that isolation. So your willingness to share with us and with those who are listening in is, I think, really admirable. And I am so appreciative of the time that you've taken. I also want to thank anyone who's joined us and listening. And I ask you to join us in the conversation as well. Let us know what you got out of today, what questions you might have for us, for Aaron, what strategies you're using in your distance learning. You can find us on Twitter at CTL Online. You can find us on Facebook at the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning, or on the web at ctlonline.org. And lastly, I would just ask that you support the work of this podcast and the goal that we have to elevate the voice of teachers right now. Share this podcast on social media, #CrushingCovid, and check in with us on Thursday at 2. You'll hear my talented colleague Jennifer Wright as she interviews a rock star second grade teacher, Miss John L. Simpson. And I can't wait to hear sort of what a different perspective a second grade teacher has from you at the middle school level, or a previous guest at the high school level. And on that note, take care of yourself and one another, and we will see you the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.